Father, we just thank you for this beautiful day you've given us. We thank you for the opportunity to be gathered here for the study of the book of Romans, what Paul wrote, and just help us to understand it better, and just be with Stacy as he goes through the scriptures and explains. And we just thank you so much for Jesus and his love. In his name we pray.
You need to help me out this morning a little bit. I haven't been wearing my hearing aid hardly ever. I have one just on one side. And so when I do something like this, I wear it so I can interact, right? When I preach, it doesn't matter. I don't have to hear myself, right? But right now I'm realizing that how deficient my right ear is when I have my left hearing aid in. So it's discombobulating a little bit. So anyway, don't be afraid to speak up a little bit. I'm going to try to elicit some interaction today. I thought for sure I'd remember which verse we quit on, but I'm not 100% sure of that from last week. So I do remember talking about Romans chapter 1, verse I remember talking about him praying, which is verse 10. So maybe we start at verse 11 and just go through a couple of these verses, kind of skim through them a little bit until we get to the theme verses that we'll get today. For I long to see you that I may impart some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. So you see that Paul's, the way he views his interaction with the church is not a one-way thing, right? He knows that everybody in the church will have spiritual gifts, and that he also has spiritual gifts, and it's an exchange. It's a working together of an exchange of the benefit then of God working through each one of us through our spiritual gifts. So he's not going just thinking he's going to give something. He's going also knowing the way God works through the Holy Spirit that he also will receive ministry from them. I want you to know, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. So Paul has had it on his agenda. Hey, I want to make it to Rome. I want to make it to Rome. I want to make it to Rome. Melissa and I finally made it to Rome this summer. It's the first time we've been there. But it took a pretty good effort to get there, right? It took a lot of planning, and it was not an easy thing to pull off. Now, Paul, too, has in his mind, this is the seat of power. This is the seat of culture. This is where everything influentially from the Mediterranean world, emanates politically, militarily, economically. Pretty good place to go and have some influence so that it can be propagated to the people and influences and power that emanates from Rome. So he's had this agenda to go to Rome. He keeps getting stopped and stopped and stopped from going. And, there probably are different reasons that he's gotten stopped. If you look at his experience in Acts, like around chapter 16 in his ministry in Asia Minor, you see him talking about how he got stopped for this reason when he intended to do that. He got stopped for that reason when he intended to do that. So, there were health issues then involved. There were geographical issues involved, it seems. There are all kinds of things involved. But also, potentially, Satan himself has caused some problems here that have prevented him from getting there. So there's probably a conglomeration of reasons why he hasn't been able to get there, but he's had it on his agenda to do that. He wants to have a harvest there among them, hopefully helping them to extend the church and draw more people in. But also he says the rest of the Gentiles, so he's thinking beyond them as well, it seems like. which we know has to do with his desire to be sent by them to Spain. We talked about that last week. I'm under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. So this means who? Everybody, really. He's under obligation to everybody. And in particular here, he's talking about not specifically the Jews, because he recognizes that his ministry isn't just to the Jews, even though he himself is a Jew, but his ministry now is to the whole world, to pull all people in. So he's bringing light to that. It's the Jews and everybody else. So I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. And I'm not sure where among those verses we stopped, so I thought I'd hit them kind of briefly there before we moved on. Any thoughts or observations here? One thing I think I did say last time is when he says he's under obligation, right? Remember how he views his ministry is he's a slave, he has a master, he doesn't get to pick what he does. He's obligated to a master to do these things. All right. Now, these next verses, verse 16 and 17, are thematic in this letter. They kind of set the stage. They're pretty pithy. They have some big ideas in there that connect back to the Old Testament pretty dramatically. I've struggled this week a lot with studying for these two verses. Is honestly the only thing I'm studying in Romans this whole week. But the connections that happen to be here in where I'm preaching from in Nehemiah this morning are pretty extensive. So I've been trying to keep two separate things going here that aren't really separate biblically, and I've struggled to make something coherent, one for now and one for the sermon. It's been a big struggle for me. And I wouldn't say that I've accomplished it, so we're just going to have to struggle through these things. So let's read these two verses. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Okay, this is kind of a semantically not a way that we would speak. So it's kind of a lot to unpack here so that we know what we're dealing with. And I also don't know how the timing will go this morning. I couldn't really figure out from the timing perspective how to do this and know where I was going to hit. So we're just going to start struggling. Maybe we'll be done early and maybe we'll be done next week. I don't know. So there's some words here, and what I want to do here, I decided I would do, it's a little different than what I normally would do, is to take these big ideas, kind of blow them up, and try to bring them back down to a place where we can get through Romans. Okay? So a lot of these words that we see here, maybe we take them for granted. Many times these words are multifaceted in what they convey, but Paul picks some of those facets to carry through Romans. Okay? So in this case, you don't want to be taking the multifaceted aspect of these first of all, and imposing all of those facets onto these words and ideas, and trying to plow through Romans with all of those in mind. So it's more helpful to say, what is Paul concerned about here in regard to these things, so that I can really get the theology that he is tracking with in this particular letter. So sometimes we can say, well, this word or this ideas has all these implications, but we really need to focus on these so we can really come out of Romans with a thorough understanding, specifically what he's going to say. Okay? It's tough to do. It's really tough to do. So let's take words out of here first. And I want to press you. I want you guys to give me some feedback here. I want you to help me here so we can struggle together through these things. I don't want to just only lecture to you. So the word gospel. What does that mean?
It's a story, isn't it?
Story.
The good news.
The good news is
It's
technically.
about God.
That's the translation of it, really.
Good news.
Good news is the translation of the Greek word euangelion there. Okay, so now that we got that, what's the good news?
Jesus.
Salvation.
Jesus. Okay, all right. How do I want to approach that? Okay, we know who Jesus is. That's the Sunday school answer, right? Okay. But yes, it is all tied up in Jesus, that's for sure. Okay, I'm going to leave that hang there for a minute because of what we got written there. Okay, the next thing we have is, we read this again, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God. Power of God. How is this the power of God?
Good word.
Word.
Truth.
Truth. Okay. So Paul is thinking about Rome, which is the seat of power. Okay. So think about power then, how people would perceive power. If you just talked about power, if you went into Rome, didn't say nothing about the gospel, the good news, Jesus, salvation, and you just started talking about power, what kinds of things would people think about?
Strength, control.
Strength and control, that's good.
The empire.
For sure.
Miracles.
Well, they probably wouldn't if you're not talking about the church. If you just went and talked to a Roman citizen who didn't even know nothing about Jesus yet, what would they think? So Paul's using these words that might have connecting points to the way people think.
Authority.
Authority. Caesar. Okay. Military. All right. So when you think you live in not just a culture like that anywhere, you know, governments, economy, all these things have so much power over people's lives. And when Caesar says something, you know what? That's the way it is. Because he was considered Lord. Okay? So now, Paul's saying, I recognize that there's power, that you guys will recognize this power, but let me tell you what real power is. They have all this power with the military, the economy, Caesar with his scepter, all these things, and they, with such fragility, just kind of keep most of the Mediterranean world from spiraling out into absolute chaos, which we know ultimately, eventually it did happen, but chaos. You're just barely suppressing what would otherwise be chaos. Okay? But, you know, Paul's saying now there's something that's real power. Now there's something that has the potential to truly change the world, to transform it. and make it something that it isn't, but that it should be. Okay? So please, please, take this idea, don't take it lightly, I would say that. If you wish you had power, if you wish you had political power, totally on your side and in your court, if you wish you had economic systems, totally on your side, in your court, done your way, if you wish you could tell somebody how to implement the might of the military, you might think then everything would be all right and everything would change for the better. At its best, it's just barely stopping the chaos. But now, church in Rome, church in Wingate, here's power. The good news. The gospel. The gospel for what it does in every individual person who needs it and what they become. The gospel for what happens in the community of Christ, the church, when all the individuals come together led by the Holy Spirit. There's such power in this. Okay? And like I said, it's easy for us to get distracted by, man, I wish we had political power right now. And most of us feel like we don't, probably. I'm trying to think of what to say, not to say. Good luck.
Yeah.
Okay. I've said this before, and I have said it from the pulpit at different times, I think. That's kind of more of our go-to and what takes our attention, especially in an election cycle. We get riled up, don't we? I get too riled up. I pay too much attention to the news, and it riles me up. And we ask, why? Why are we where we're at? Why is society like it is? Why are people like this in power? Why? And listen, we have more power than they do. And I have accused the church, which is me, of the reason things are the way they are in the United States of America and the world is because the church has failed to wield their power in all of its might. The gospel. Because if we wield it extensively, to the furthest extents, to the most people, that's when things change, is when individual people come under the influence of the gospel. That's where the power is. So if you're a little irritated about where things are at in culture, politics, look to yourself. You have the power to change it. All this power is wrapped up in the power of God, is wrapped up in this gospel message, the good news. Okay? So, that's a message to Rome. It's a message to us, right? Is take this power, man. Take it and wield it. Fling it out. Take it everywhere. Overrun the world with this power. Okay. Any questions there?
Unfortunately, people still reject it when they hear it.
Yeah, sure they do.
I like what my study note has to say on Paul's spirit of eagerness versus how we might serve out of habit or obligation or reluctantly see that it's our duty.
Yeah.
Where he has eagerness and we're looking at it with a different perspective sometimes.
Yeah, and I think by the time we get to this, we should be excited about the fact that in our hands is a power that is greater than has ever been known for us to use. mean, that's not something you don't get excited about, right? In my mind.
And when we get knocked down, like Sandy said, or rejected, we have to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's easy to just, hide and not want to try again.
Or get tired.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, when we get knocked down and people reject it, that's not the end of the matter. How many times do you know, like for one instance, our ministry we did, in church plant we did in North Carolina, just to give one example, is there was a young lady we baptized from China. She was one of the international students. And she actually lived with Melissa and I for a summer. So we had some significant influence on her. She lived with another international student from Mexico when her first semester when she was there. Another young lady who was a Christian and who was a PK from Mexico. Her dad was a preacher. So she had a ton of influence on her. And then one of the men who was working with us in our ministry but attended Sunday morning somewhere else, somebody in his church actually took her confession of Christ. And then we baptized her. Okay? And so, like this other guy, he was like talking up how, this girl got saved. I'm like, in his church, or whatever. I'm like, hey, there's been a lot of people that God's used to talk to her. It's not one person. I said, not least the girl who endured her craziness and had to live with her for a semester. And she was mentally pretty disturbed when we started with her. So anyway, it's easy for us to gauge what is not happening when you want to see the baptism, right? That's what you really want to see. You want to see the confession and the baptism, and that person's in Christ, and it happened. Okay, but hey, I work with people for years and years. You need the patience and the hope and the prayer and the time. And then other times, God happens to put you in a person's life where it's one conversation. But probably there are other things that God has been doing through other people that you have no idea about that led them to the point where they're ready to hear that. So, wielding the power, don't be discouraged. Just do it. And if it seems like you get knocked down, that's not the end of the story. And God's using you in a longer story that you may not tell the other side of things, know how things can come together. I'll just say that. Okay. Here's a bigger idea. The next one. I'm going to keep reading. For it is the power of God for salvation. This is going to be maybe a bigger conversation for us. This is one of those multifaceted issues, perhaps. And I've decided that instead of only letting it unfold piece by piece over 16 chapters, that I'm going to try to give some direction up front, because this is one we're more likely to impose on it. Okay? So let's talk about what we think Paul might be talking about here for salvation. What is salvation?
Being reconciled to God. Personal relationship.
Any other thoughts?
Would
by saying it like that, which has some merit there for sure. Okay, I want you to think about this. What do you envision for the future in your salvation?
Heaven?
What's that?
Heaven?
Say again? But
I said live with God.
Live with God.
Heaven.
Restoration? Being saved, we were bought with a price.
Freedom.
You know, throughout the New Testament, there's so many different metaphors that talk about salvation, and they each of them kind of hones in on one facet of a bigger issue. They really do. Okay, so a couple issues that I want to deal with here are. First of all, think about this, the metaphors that Paul will use. And we're jumping ahead here, right? I just want to, like I said, give you the tools to be able to get through this without imposing other things on you. Okay, so some of the things he uses is, you'll recognize this. This is the big conversation. Justification, that'll come up. All right? What's justification? This is our right standing before God. It's what He always created us for us, what He's always wanted for us, and He puts us back to that. Okay? So this standing before God. Another one is adoption. You know, there's a family of God, and you're a part of it. And we've been talking about this issue of God told Abraham, hey, you're a Jew now, you know, and I'm going to bless all families of the whole world through you. And so your children are the ones who come in to the family of God. That's your children. So, okay, so that you're the people of God. Maybe you are now the people of God. Glorification. Glory, that word glory comes up all throughout here. Glory got messed up. Glory is restored. And now, I wrote down, I want to write this. Let's write it like this, your role. So you're standing before God, your family position before God, and the people of God, and your role before God. So you have this role in creation to reflect the glory of God, bearing His image into creation, to reflect the glory of God's creation back to Him. This is how we were created to exist, and that's restored. Okay. So here's something that I want to caution when we're reading through this, is just to be frank with you, I mean, we often think about this, right? This is a big thought process in evangelical Christianity. Heather. Paul is just about not concerned about that at all, especially in Romans. Okay? Because what Paul is telling them in this letter is that he just doesn't even address it. What he's saying is, look, there's a restoration, good word, of all things. And this was my covenant promise. Pull all these people in to the family of God. I'm going to make their standing right. I'm going to restore their role in creation and before me to right. And it's the people of God, which is what I always had in mind. And a part of all things being made right again in Jesus Christ is creation. Chapter 8 will deal with this extensively. Is that creation is restored, renewed, and we continue then into all of eternity to be a part of that. Okay, so it's not that heaven is not a part of our experience. Because if I die today, I hope to be hanging out right there. But Ephesians 1:10 is a good verse for this, to understand the goal beyond that. Well, let's look here. Let's just look at it in Ephesians. I'm going to say it, I'm going to look at it, right? Not that hard to do. Yeah, I can tell I preached all the way through this book because I got marks all over it. So I've already read this to you at some point. Verse 10, as a plan for the fullness of time, to unite all things in Him, Jesus, things in heaven and things on earth. Okay? So view salvation in one sense this way, is that sin pressed a dichotomy between the presence of God and the presence of men inside of creation. So now what you have, let me actually do it this way, right? Because that's the way we do it. Dichotomy. There's a separation. So now you have God in heaven is the way we view it, and people